I'm joined today by Kirk Jackson, running for State House of Representatives in District 28, Seat B. So without any further ado, Kirk, tell us why you're running and what brought you to this point.
Well, the reason I'm running, I guess I was shown the information about how our current representatives are voting, and I didn't feel that they were voting in line or representing the values that we possess here in Southeast Idaho. I thought it over for quite a while, and finally decided that since no one else was going to try and fix it, then it had to be me.
What's what's your background? What's your expertise in, and what are you bringing to the discussion?
Well, I've run an HVAC business in Pocatello for over 35 years. I've been involved in retail sales. I was in commercial properties. I even owned a detail shop, an auto detail shop, for a couple of years. I've been involved in farming for over 20 years. So what I found through all that experience is that most of the problems we deal with as business people, as farmers, or as individuals come from the government. And I didn't see anybody doing anything to try and, limit that or rein in that excessive government. So that was my idea. I could go there and try to, make life a little easier for everyone, make it a little more straightforward.
So as you've been, I'm looking at your district map on the screen over here. District 28 is very strange. It's, got, a little, it's almost looks like a snake shape. It's just goes everywhere. It's got a little hole cut out for Pocatello. What kind of unique challenges do the people of your district face? What are some of the unique ideas there? And also, what are you hearing from people about what their concerns are?
Actually, the concerns vary depending on which part of the district you're in. We have an area around Pocatello that's a more urban area, and the people there are more concerned about their property taxes. Of course, everywhere you go, you seem to have concerns about the school system, no matter where you go. But when we move into, say, the Franklin County area, those people are much more conservative. So when we go there and talk to those people, it's more about what's the state going to do to protect the rights of individual citizens, and that varies. Like when we get over into Power County, into American Falls, what we hear about is state DOT projects, how they're going to affect the local economy, things like that. So there's really, other than the idea of property taxes and cleaning up our schools, make them operate a little better, there's a pretty wide variety of issues that we have to deal with depending on what part of the district we're in.
So how does one go represent such a diverse district? How do you go to the legislature and restrict the size and scope of government so that it protects individual rights while also doing the things that people want government to do, schools and roads and projects like that?
Well, that might be the difficult part of this. However, a lot of the things that need done in when you start restricting the government's power and its sway over people, and you start making the government accountable for its actions, you find that tends to solve at least part of the problem no matter who you're talking to. So when you're talking to someone, that's worried about, road projects, or you're talking to someone that's worried about basic rights, when you start scaling back government a little bit, then you tend to satisfy all of their needs. And you don't need 10 different ideas. And sometimes they don't understand that right up front, that, well, if we can simplify government, it not only makes it easier for everyone to operate, it also brings the government closer to the people, which will always solve problems. As the closer you get to the actual citizens and the people that need your service, the more likely you are to be able to provide for their needs.
So you mentioned schools. Obviously, the state is required to fund a public education system, and the people have been talking about school choice. Obviously, we do have school choice in that we can send our children where we want, but people have been talking additionally about having tax money follow the children to those choices. Last year, an education savings account bill failed, and this year, a tax credit bill failed. So it seems like it's a tough sell in the Idaho legislature. What would you like to see in that arena? And what do you think you can get through?
Well, that is a tough sell. See, the current law in Idaho states that you have the right to school choice, and it also states that government oversight does not follow that right. Okay. And I know there are a lot of people that are in favor of that. They want to homeschool their kids, and they don't want the government telling them how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I certainly understand that opinion. I don't want the government in my house either. But as soon as you start asking for money, then many of the people in the government are going to have a different opinion. They're going to want some kind of accountability on this. And in the case of a private school, let's say you're going to send your kids to a private school, then that private school probably needs to have accountability for the money. But, in the same token, the argument you get from these people is that the public schools aren't really accountable for the money either. I mean, they get the money, they may not do the job, they just still keep getting the money. So maybe the solution here would be to get everybody together and say, let's come up with a standard that everyone has to meet. The public schools, the private schools, and at least to some degree the home schools, so that maybe we could reach a resolution on where the money can go and how much money can go there. I know a lot of times you will hear concerns from legislators about defunding public education. But I've talked to a lot of people that are in the process of taking their kids out of the public schools because they don't believe they're doing the right thing. So the argument there is then, well, if the public schools aren't doing the job, why are they still getting the money? It's a tough issue, and we're all going to have to get together and find a center point. We're going to have to find one point that we can all agree on if we're going to solve this.
So if you're fortunate enough to be elected, where do you see yourself being able to do the most good? What committees would you want to serve on? What kind of legislation would you want to get behind right away?
Well, I think that, protecting the kids in our schools is an important issue. We've had bills fail for several years in a row now on the issue of pornography in our schools. And you'll hear some representatives say that it's not there or it doesn't exist in Idaho. That's really a kind of a naive approach to this. I mean, it's there. We know it's there, but we have to do something about that, because we can't allow that poison to take hold and really infect our, the next generation that's coming up. So that's one issue that I think we need to deal with. Another issue is taxes and budgeting. They passed a bill in this legislative session that deals with taxes. They gave a little tiny income tax relief that actually nobody's even going to notice. It was so small. It's for the average family, we're talking about, $15 or something like that. It's not going to be a noticeable amount, but they, they get to say they gave us a tax decrease. They committed to borrowing $1 billion over 10 years to fund permanent buildings and improvements in schools. And this same bill, they referenced, I don't know, numerous Idaho codes more than 4 dozen times. The bill was so complicated, it would take you a month to try and work your way through it and see what it actually deals with. And it handed money out in a lot of different places. I think we really need to rein in those type of things. I mean, we saw the omnibus bill that passed the federal legislation a year and a half ago that has turned into a nightmare. And this is just another thing like that. They called it a Christmas tree bill. We're going to be dealing with the problems created by this for 10 more years. And it violates Idaho code. Idaho code says that one bill, one issue, but the governor got behind this, a bunch of legislators got behind it. And I think those kind of things we need to carve out. We need to stop doing that type of thing.
Well, one of the issues that they were hoping to address with that bill, I think, is that there's a disparity between, schools across the state. The legislature is constitutionally mandated to provide for a uniform free public education system, but you see rural districts have trouble getting the money to have, new buildings and new equipment, whereas the urban ones that have a much bigger tax base are able to do different things. How do we solve that issue? Even this bill, I heard debate on it saying that the rural schools were still going to end up getting the short end of the stick.
Well, they are, and it's based in the fact that, over in Ada County, the tax base is so much larger that to construct a new building, it's going to, cost each of the patrons a few dollars, $8, $7, something like that. You get out into a rural school district, and that number can turn into $90 or $100 that it costs each patron. So there is a big discrepancy. And one of the things in that bill that already had to be corrected was that they were going to require all schools to go to a 5-day week, right? Well, I know a lot of the rural schools in Idaho are on a 4-day week, and in fact, that's the vast majority of the schools in Idaho. So transportation costs, if the area that your school covers has only 2 or 3 square miles, transportation costs aren't a big deal. But say here in the Marsh Valley School District that I live in, that school district probably covers something like 140, 150 square miles. And so transportation costs become a big deal, and having 4 longer days instead of 5 shorter ones saves the district a lot of money, allows them to offer a lot more programs. But this was just a case of the population centers running over the rural areas. We see that problem nationwide. We see it in other states in many ways, and we've got to keep in mind that we can't have a cookie cutter program for our schools. We've got to realize that different districts have different problems and different needs.
Speaking of taxes, property tax is a huge issue. That's probably the most consistent thing I've heard across the state. People are worried about property taxes, and everyone wants the legislature to do something, but property taxes are local. It's your cities, your counties, your school districts, your fire districts, library districts, cemetery districts, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, they did pass a bill last year that essentially, gave back some of your property tax money. What else could we do from a legislative perspective to bring relief from property taxes?
Well, the property tax rates are actually set by the state. Okay, the counties, apply that and they assess the amounts, but the rates are set by the state. So one of the things we could do, this gets kind of complicated. There was a change to the budget process in the last year, right? How the budgets have worked in the past for the state is every state agency would put their fixed expenses and their discretionary expenses into one pie, and the legislature would have to just pass that for that agency without actually knowing what all they were spending the money on. And there's a time constraint to this. There are so many state agencies that the legislature would spend so much time just working through all those budgets that they didn't have time to look at anything. What they changed this year was they separated the fixed and the discretionary expenses. They would lump the fixed expenses from 8 or 10 or 15 different agencies together and approve them all at once. That saved the legislature enough time that they actually got to look at the discretionary expenses. So for many years now, we've had a 10% increase per year on everything. Last year, we had a 12% increase. In the current fiscal year, because we were actually able to look at the discretionary expenses, that increase dropped to less than 2%, right? So my feeling is if we could find time, even if we can't do all the agencies in one year, if we could start looking at the fixed expenses in these agencies, I think there would be an equal amount of savings in those. And if we can accomplish that, then we can actually look at what we could do to help people with taxes, either with property taxes or with income taxes, to actually make a difference. And the end result is you cut the state spending, you cut the waste, you cut out the things you don't need, and then the taxpayers aren't having to pay for all that. It sounds simple, I know. It's probably going to be very difficult to implement, but that's the direction I believe we need to go.
Well, one thing I've noticed is that even though everybody comes in with an idea of what we don't need that the government's paying for, every single line item has someone who will stand up and defend it and say, this is important. You can't cut this. So how do we get a handle on prioritizing what we can actually cut from what government is spending money on? How do we convince people to do that?
Well, that's going to be the hard part of applying this idea, I suppose. I think what we have to do is look at how does each individual line item actually benefit the citizens in Idaho. I'm not worried about how they benefit the administrators. I'm not worried about how they benefit the government agencies or whatever. you got to look at how they benefit the actual citizens and the businesses and the business community in Idaho, and prioritize those items by that benefit. Then you obviously the ones with the most benefit you're going to fund. When you get down to the bottom where there's little or no benefit to them, those are the ones that you're going to have to cut out. And I'm sure that that's going to make some people unhappy, but it'll make the taxpayers happy, and that's the important part.
Well, one thing I have noticed as well is that for every government program, every government benefit, there's people who rely on it, who depend on it, whether they're government employees or people in certain industries that get subsidies or assistance, or just direct, welfare payments like Medicaid expansion. Earlier this year, there was a bill to put safeguards or sideboards on the Medicaid expansion program, and a whole bunch of people signed up to say, "You can't do this. I rely on this. If you take this away, I'll die." And that makes it difficult to go against that, to pull back these programs, because it's, I mean, politically, there's a bias toward the short-term thinking, because you have to come back every 2 years and get elected. So if you do something that threatens, people's reliance on that, then they're going to come and try and get you out and get someone in who will keep the gravy train running. So how do you scale that back without just, going back to square one every time?
Well, that's a problem, okay? And many of your legislatures are that's what they're thinking about. Well, if I vote against this, am I going to get reelected? The real solution to this is you got to get enough people in there that don't care about being reelected. They just want to do the right thing for the state, okay? And maybe that sounds like utopia. I myself didn't want to be elected to begin with. I'm just doing this because nobody else would. So for me, the prospect of not being reelected there's no specter to that. I'm going to do what I feel is best for the state, for the citizens. We have to protect the citizens' rights in Idaho, period. And the Medicaid thing, they talked about cutting that one program, and there was a lot of pushback on that, and yet they slid in there and took, was it $12 or $18 million away from Medicaid and put it into the Millennium Income Fund. And I don't know how many people are familiar with that. This is the fund that all the tobacco money goes into, and it's supposed to it's supposed to help prevent people from getting, into the tobacco habit. Well, why are we taking money away from the actual medical services that people need to put into that fund? I guess sometimes I think we're trading, we're washing one hand to wash another. It's the go along to get along process, and that needs to be scaled way back, because that creates many of our problems. Just like with this Medicaid thing, they're taking money away that you don't see and talking about cutting another part of Medicaid, probably because they've already taken money away.
Shifting gears a little bit, I was looking back at the incumbent. He is in his first term, and he only won the primary last time by 301 votes. So obviously, that's not a super broad base of support in your district. As you've been talking to people, going to events, knocking on doors, do you feel some support growing?
I've had a lot of support at the events that I've gone to down in Franklin County. We've got a couple coming up in Power County. I've attended one event in Bannock County. It was by the Bannock County Women's Republicans, and the support there was pretty good. it's funny, Bannock County it's obviously the one with the most population in this district, but it has the least amount of participation.
Hmm.
So it's been kind of an odd situation that way. When we go down to Franklin County, a lot of people are participating. In Bannock County, not so much, and maybe that's the urban disease. You get to where you're going to go on with your life and you're not going to pay any attention.
Yeah, Pocatello itself obviously is in District 29, but it's got two Democrats and a Republican, and then which is very strange. Why are cities always Democratic? That's the $1 million question. But then you get outside of it, and it's obviously going to be more conservative. You've got, you're right up next to Blaine County, which is also, purple if not blue. So yeah, like you said earlier, it's a diverse district with a lot of different priorities. But you said you're hearing a lot of support from it. That's a good sign.
Yeah.
One of the things that's kind of on the table this year, especially in this primary, is the relationship between the voters, the Republican Party, and the Republican legislators. You've got Republican parties, county and legislative committees throughout the state who are censuring their legislators for, not voting according to the Republican platform. And you've got an effort to try and retake the Idaho Republican Party. A lot of, millions of dollars are being poured into this to win precinct committeeman races. What do you think should be how do we repair the relationship between the party and the legislators? Get everybody back on the same page and be united again.
Well, I think one thing that has created this problem, in Southeast Idaho, at least, you've mentioned there's a couple of Democrats that actually won in Pocatello. But when you get into the outlying areas, the Democrats can't win. Okay, that's been pretty much the rule. So what in many cases you have is the Democrat just goes and re-registers as a Republican so he can win the race, and then he votes as a Democrat. And that is much of what is causing the divide in the Republican Party. We have the Republicans are supposed to be the conservatives. I'm certainly a conservative. My mantra would be, God, family, country, and guns, right? But we have people, in office that we'll just call them what they are. They're the rhinos, okay? And that creates a discrepancy in the party. I don't think that there's a huge disconnect between the moderates and the people on the far right. But when you get the rhinos in there that are left leaning, okay, then you're covering a lot of territory. There's a big discrepancy between them and the far right, and there ends up being no agreement because there's too much space between the basic tenets. The moderates and the people farther right have a much more in common and are much more likely to be able to agree. We've just got to, cycle some of the rhinos out of the party. We have to recognize them, get them out of the party, and then the party will heal itself. We do have conservative organizations popping up. Bannock Conservative Coalition is one. There's conservative organizations down in Franklin County, and we see them popping up in other areas of the state as well. And as those coalitions grow, they will help push the rhinos out of the party. I believe eventually, if we keep at it, we'll solve the problem.
Hopefully we can.
Yeah,
I feel like we're Well, sometimes I feel like we're on a sinking ship, and instead of figuring out how to escape, we're all just fighting each other.
Well, and it's funny, we're going to see significant gains in the precincts in Bannock County this year. We gained in 22, and we're going to gain again this year. And yet we have representatives that don't really aren't really in line with the direction the party in Bannock County is going. On the other hand, you have say up in District 30 in Blackfoot, you have precinct people that are really left-leaning liberal type people, and yet you have very conservative representatives. So it sometimes turns into a strange mixture. I think we just need to continue with the conservative coalitions, the conservative organizations. The John Birch Society down there in Preston, they're doing a lot of good work. If we keep up with those organizations and keep expanding those, eventually I believe they're going to overcome the problem.
Well, I've appreciated your time today. Is there anything we didn't cover that you want to make sure you talk about, or just closing thoughts?
Well, there's a lot we didn't cover.
I'm sure we could talk
there
for
was
hours.
A bill that would have put good guys with guns in our schools.
Mm-hmm.
The protection we need. That one failed. And there are other issues that I personally have. I believe right to repair is something we need to do for the farmers, for the small businessmen. And yes, that is maybe us working into the free market a little more than we should. And having been in business for many years, I'm a real fan of the free market. But we also have to have guardrails, and we have to realize that when too much power gets concentrated in too small of a space, freedom becomes the first victim of that.
Yeah, that's an issue. It's been a couple years since I've heard of it, but I haven't heard anyone in Idaho talking about it. Yeah, that goes from everything from cell phones to tractors.
Yeah, and there was a group of farmers that won a lawsuit against John Deere in Iowa on this. So you're gonna hear more about it in the future. I guess the only other thing that we really need to think about is border security. I mean, that's a huge issue. There was a bill that would have put Idaho in the compact of states to help with the border security, but we had quite a few people that voted against that.
I believe that passed the House, but failed in the Senate, if I recall correctly. Or it didn't even get a hearing in the Senate, like a lot of good bills.
Yeah. Well, I think when it got to committee in the Senate, it just got put in the drawer.
Yeah. Well, since you mentioned border security, that is an issue that is, really contentious right now. There were two competing memorials in the legislature. One that was really harsh. It called on the president to be impeached. It wanted enforce the law, and it directly called out the Idaho industries. Big ag, for example, that profit from both guest workers and illegal migration. There was a report that came out that same week that it was debated, saying that 35,000 illegal aliens are employed in Idaho. And then there was another memorial, the one that passed, that called on reforming the immigration system to bring in more legal workers and implicitly to do, have a path to citizenship or, guest worker status for those who are here illegally. How do we solve the issue? How do we enforce our laws without tanking our economy? Because that's what a lot of Eastern Idaho legislators say, that if we deport the illegals and stop allowing them to come in, then there's going to be nobody to pick the crops, and we'll all have to pay 3 times as much for food.
Well, I'm in favor of legal immigration. I have a daughter-in-law that's from Morocco. Okay. It took a year. for her to get a visa to come here, and she was already married to an American citizen. Okay, legal immigration is something we need. Okay, and we can fill the ag's needs through legal immigration. And you know, agriculture in Idaho, they already have plenty of people working. We don't need 10 million more. Okay, we have to control the border. And if there's a shortage, if we come up against a shortage of people in our agricultural industries, we can temporarily change the number of people we're allowing in. I mean, we can make adjustments, we can make it work, but first you have to control the border, and it has to be done legal immigration so that we're not letting in terrorists and criminals. You know, we're letting in people that are going to come here and work and contribute to the system. They're going to work. They're going to become citizens. They're going to become Americans. They're not here to rob us or blow us up. They're here to work and live just like we are.
All right, then. Closing thoughts. What's your message to the voters?
My message to voters would be, before you go to the polls on March 21st, the state legislature has a website where you can go online and find out what your representative is doing. And I would suggest you do that so that you know whether you want to vote for the current guy or you want to try and get rid of him.
Kirk Jackson, candidate for House of Representatives, District 28, Seat B. Thank you.